Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we're focusing on the COP27 after being wrapped up in the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace, and the future of green cities that will be implemented all over Egypt and more hopefully all over the region and the planet, as we are looking to a more greener, to a cleaner future energy for the future generations in Egypt and the world. The COP27 was wrapped up today on Sunday in the morning, in the early hours of Sunday, as it was announced the loss and damage deal, the fund that was announced by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, the president of the COP27, and it is being hailed as one of the best all over the world and one of the best throughout history in terms of the green energy, the renewable energy for the future generations in Egypt and the world. And we will be starting straight away with the top stories of today. One of them, as I mentioned, it comes from the COP27. The main topic would be about the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, but one of the main top stories for today is it comes from the Middle East as well, from the Arab world, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was there in Qatar to be attending the opening ceremony of the World Cup. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took part on Sunday in the 2022 FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in Qatar. The president's participation in the world's prominent sportive event came upon an invitation from the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, in light of the brotherly ties binding the two countries. As one major event is being inaugurated in the region, in the Middle East and the Arab world for the first time, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, the COP27 drew to an end, drew to a close on Sunday morning after wrapping up the COP27 conference. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry held the press conference with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Foreign Minister Shoukry assured that the decisions that were reached in the conference are the way to reach the climate neutrality. Shoukry said that the conference did not abide by the traditional resolutions, adding that the conference agreed on establishing the Losses and Damages Fund to confront the negative effects of the climate change. He said that the Sharm el-Sheikh summit had put all the climate issues in an executive frame. He said Egypt will resume working in the climate issues during the presidency till handing over the common ground to the United Arab Emirates. Shoukry said that the event's adaptation program follows a work plan aimed at preserving the planet's temperature. He added that the COP27 conference worked on overcoming all the challenges of the climate changes. He said that the conference agreed on all the concerned decisions to face the damages of climate change. Addressing the final session of the COP27, Shoukry said that the world has reached a critical stage with regards to the climate challenges, and that the meetings were held with all the parties to reach the closing consensus. Shoukry said that the means of committing to the climate agenda and planning the suitable scheme to address the Paris Agreement topped the agenda of the talks. He said the participants were asked to deal with the responsibility and make badly needed decisions to face the climate change. As I said in the beginning, the COP27, the summit of actions and implementation, would be the main topic for the daily debate for tonight. We will be having the first report of the program for tonight coming from the COP27 with all the solutions that came from 2 weeks of talks and more in the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. We have more details in the upcoming report.
إنني وإذ أتطلع إلى استقبالكم من قمة المناخ 27 التي تستضيفها مصر في شرم الشيخ.
The 27th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, drew to a close on Saturday. No doubt, many significant achievements were made in the course of it, but more effort and political will are urgently needed to reach the goals that participants in that significant summit agreed were crucial to saving the whole world, both rich and poor. The participation of key world leaders, including the host President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, US President Joe Biden, and dozens of European, African, and Arab heads of state, confirmed the increasing awareness of the dire need to save the planet. President el-Sisi said that peoples around the globe are waiting for tangible results from the World Climate Summit COP27. They are looking for a real change that turns negotiations and pledges into actual steps at all levels to put into for the targets of the Paris Agreement, especially the goal to limit global warming to well below 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels. President el-Sisi's speech came during the virtual leader-level meeting of the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate, MEF. President el-Sisi also announced that Egypt has joined the Global Methane Pledge, the first ever heads of state global commitment to cut methane emissions at a level of consistent with a 1.5 degrees Celsius, through which Egypt will enhance efforts to reduce methane emissions from the petroleum and natural gas sector, benefiting from the expertise and funding provided by the initiative and in cooperation with the international partners in this sector. To limit global warming to well below 1.5 degrees Celsius will not only be achieved by reducing emissions and meeting the targets set by the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, but also by providing much-needed finance to help the world's majority of poor countries that suffer most from effects of climate change, while contributing very little to harmful emissions. In this respect, hundreds of representatives of civil society organizations that part in COP27, along with political leaders, played a key role in setting ambitious goals to global climate action. Difficult negotiations were reportedly taking place up until the last hours of the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, particularly on two key points. First, loss and damage has been officially placed on the agenda of COP summits for the first time, reflecting a major success for Egypt's diplomatic efforts. Secondly, participants agreed to meet the targets set for reducing gas emissions to limit the rise in temperature. Scientists say that the amount of greenhouse gases being pumped into the atmosphere needs to be halved by 2030 to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. Participants in the summit had to agree on concrete steps to support mitigation efforts in light of international scientific reports indicating the necessity of swiftly taking action in this regard to keep global temperatures at safe levels. Foreign Minister and COP27 President Sameh Shoukry rightly noted that it was crucial to enhance technical negotiations through political consensus. While it is easy to deliver well-crafted speeches on commitment to combat climate change, what is clearly missing on both fronts, loss and damage, as well as emission reduction, is the political will of all parties to commit to mitigation efforts, increase their reduction efforts, and provide clear guarantees in this regard. While paving the way to successful negotiations at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt has also contributed to reaching several key initiatives at the summit that would help the world and particularly developing nations to combat climate change. On top of these initiatives came the Global Shield Against Climate Risks. The initiative, backed by the G7 and launched with initial funding of more than $200 million, aims to provide pre-arranged financial support designed to be quickly deployed in times of climate disasters. The project would help the most vulnerable communities, but also aid wider understanding of the challenges faced by emerging economies suffering climate-induced floods, heat waves, or droughts. The first group of nations that will benefit from this scheme includes Bangladesh, Costa Rica, Fiji, Ghana, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Senegal. This welcome initiative will not be an alternative to the much larger amount of finance needed to help developing nations cope with their losses and damages as the economies of the world's largest polluter, the United States, China, and Europe, continue to grow.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, as tonight we'll be focusing on the recently concluded the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I'm honored to be having with me in the studio on such a special episode is Dr. Alaa Sarhan, the Professor of Environmental Economics. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
You're very welcome.
Anytime. First of all, speaking about the importance of hosting the COP27 here in Egypt after the conclusion of the conference of about 2 weeks or more of pledges and agreements and investments, possible investments into Egypt and into other countries within the scope of limiting the negative impacts of climate change. How do you see the importance of holding such a global summit, a global conference in Egypt?
First of all, the COP27 is hosted by Egypt on behalf of the African continent, of the 54 African countries, and just for our viewers, let me say that the African continent, the contribution of the African continent to the global emissions and the global greenhouse gas emissions is only like 3% of the total, which is by far is much less than the dire impacts of the climate, the potential impacts of climate change on the continent, especially that we know that half of the most vulnerable countries, climate change with the highest vulnerability in climate change in the world are actually in Africa, half of those countries. And it's extremely devastating to know that there is no justice. So I think the idea of Egypt hosting this on behalf of the African continent as a very clear message that Egypt would like to tell the story to the whole world, that we need to be heard as African countries, we need to be heard as developing countries that are going to be extremely devastated by the impacts, and we need to come to closure with this existential threat, and let it be heard. Let's sit down together, let's convene this, let's get everybody into the same room, the international community, 197 countries of the world, and let's talk about it, because we need to engage and we need to come up with an understanding that we've only got one planet and we're just on the tip of losing it. So this is one of the very important messages, and I think President Sisi, in his opening statement, he made it very clear that he actually gave out two, if I may, he gave out two very clear messages. The first one was from heart to heart, like being extremely like talking to the conscience of the international community and telling them that we are now, the whole world is extremely taken by, you know, all the Ukrainian Russian conflict, and we're just being absorbed by all this. Our focus is on the you know, on the repercussions and inflation, global inflation, and the war, and the prices, inflation, everything. But the real war is to combat climate change. So I think we need to focus. That's what he implicitly said was we need to focus on climate change, and we need the real war is actually on climate change. So I think for Egypt to take the lead and host this COP, which is this is a historical event. This is for the first time after 26 other conferences of parties, and this is the 27th. I think this is. It marks a historical COP that is going to go down history books with extremely very important milestones here. So we talk about milestones here, and this is extremely, I think we are setting the stage for other COPs to follow suit and to take the this, you know, our footsteps by trying to do this mega event. It's a mega event. It's the logistic nightmare, to be honest with you. I was there. It's like having the foreign secretary, the foreign minister this morning, he said that there's like 66,000 participants at the COP. So to be able to host 66,000 with like over 100 leaders and prime ministers and presidents from all over the world, from the 197 countries, the message is very clear. Yes, Egypt is able to deliver this kind of event. Yes, Egypt is able to become role model for other African nations, our brothers and sisters in Africa. And many of the initiatives that were taken by Egypt are actually sort of like a roadmap for other countries to follow suit. So I'm not going to dwell into this, but I think this is my overall takeaways from COP27.
As Doctor, you mentioned that Egypt was the voice of Africa during the COP27, the representative of Africa, of the Middle East, of the Arab world. The United Arab Emirates as well would be a good representative to Asia and the Arab world and the Middle East. But speaking on behalf of Africa, do you think that we got the message across? Did we manage to do that, to be seeking response from the richer nations, from the more industrialized nations, to be helping? We need more help for the Africans during the upcoming future, for the future generations, because they need help. They had the losses of the past and they had no hand in that. Do you think that there would be a kind of response from the richer nations?
Okay, so Egypt, because of the presidency of the COP, I mean, by definition, there's a kind of like the, you know, the party that is trying to mediate, is trying to converge the viewpoints from developing countries and the developed countries who actually should bear the responsibility, historical responsibility for where we are right now because of the since the Industrial Revolution and the use of coal and other fossil fuels since then, and cumulative, you know, like all the emissions right now. And the developing world, especially the African nations, they feel that now when it's time for them to pick up on development and try to bring to their own citizens, to bring all the development outcomes to their doorstep. Now they're being told that, listen, guys, you have to raise the ambition, doing low emission activity, low carbon emission activities, new and renewable and energies, new and renewable energy sources. All this means that they are going to be boggled up with more and more debts, because they have an issue with debts, the sustainability of the debts that they have, especially that we're coming out at a very difficult time from post-pandemic. So countries came out, even the advanced and the developing countries, they came out with high inflationary pressures, disruptions in the supply chains, lots of problems that many developing countries had to take out new loans to be able to mitigate, to be able to compensate for all the financial hardships because of the pandemic. And then comes the Ukraine-Russian conflict with even yet more and more difficulties. So the idea is we are being asked as developing countries to deliver more on new and renewable energy, on low emission development, and we have limited fiscal space because of the debts that we took out because of the pandemic and the current conflict. So how can we deliver without having the international community, or at least the advanced countries that were responsible and are responsible for historically for the emissions, how would we be able to work together to hand in hand so that we are able as developing countries to deliver all the development outcomes to our people that deserve to have higher standards of living, higher quality of life, and all this, while at the same time we need to think outside of the box by going into the green economy, by going into decoupling, we call it decoupling of GDP growth, which means that the more you grow, the less emissions that you have, which is what Egypt is adopting right now because of the green economy. So the idea is we needed to sit down, both parties, the developed, rich parties, if you will, and the developing countries, and say, we need climate finance. We need to do more on adaptation. We need to do more grants and concessional financing and less on loans and more private sector involvement, because the private sector involvement right now in adaptation is like 1.6%, which is extremely dismal, it's extremely low. So how could we work together as multilateral development banks, as advanced countries, as developing nations, in order to incentivize the private sector, so to be used as one additional important, significant arm for investment, and also try to balance out the finance that's coming in between mitigation and adaptation, because developing countries, obviously, they need more adaptation and less on mitigation, because their emissions, anyway, they are not significant as the advanced countries. So, but they need to be able to adapt and to make their development more resilient to the impacts of the climate change. So, more money is coming in for mitigation, less money is coming in for adaptation. The funds that are coming in are more on the loan side. We're talking about more than 60% of the financial flows to developing countries for climate change are in loans. Only like 20% is like concessional finance, which means like longer grace periods or lower interest rates. Grants is very low, and the participation of private sector is extremely, extremely low. So I think all these issues were discussed in Sharm at COP27, and I think it's extremely healthy to bring all these issues on the table and to let the climate diplomacy, if you will, or the Egyptian diplomacy tried to bring together the two sides to meet somewhere, and because at the end of the day, it's a win-win. If we do something about it, as President Sisi said, this is time to take action. This is time, it's now or never.
Yes.
So I think this is where Egypt has made a difference. And I think this is where COP27 is going to be viewed by our kids, the next generations, as Egypt did not let the future generations down. We tried, we did our best to bring everybody to the table, to be very honest and very candid about where we are heading, because unless we make a U-turn right now, the planet is extremely at stake, and all the livelihoods and everything that we should be looking forward to for our kids is going to be extremely at risk. So this is, I think, the message that Egypt tried to tell the whole world.
Speaking about Egypt in specific, how do you see the successful points for the Egyptian government in specific regarding the Minister of International Cooperation was there, Rania Al-Mashat, Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy, Mohammed Shakir was there, Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, Tariq Al-Mulla was there, even for the final days of the COP27, getting into agreements, getting more investments into the country, but in the fields of renewable energy. For example, the green hydrogen, for example, Nuwafi, which is about food security, water security, the security of energy even for the villages of Egypt. What are the benefits that Egypt took out from the COP27?
Okay, so what I have witnessed personally, being there myself for several days, was the Egyptian presence. The official Egyptian presence was extremely noticeable, extremely engaged. They were very much engaged. As you mentioned, the ministers, and actually there were other ministers as well. There was the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Dr. Alaa Saeed, and
Minister of Environment, Yasmin
Fuad. There were a number of ministers, and they were holding different events.
Yes.
And these events were basically to share our experiences, our initiatives with the whole world, the whole international community, to tell them that Egypt is, there is a very strong political will to move to transform the Egyptian economy to a green economy, which actually is, it's not, I wouldn't say one notch up, but it's several notches up, because it's a total transformation of the economy from the linear economy to a green economy, which is not just like slogans here and slogans there. No, there is actually impacts on the ground, there are activities on the ground, and there are projects and programs to share and to present to the people. So let me tell you this. The presence of the officials from Egypt with their teams, I think they were able to share the experiences, have a very beneficial and useful exchange of ideas, information, and knowledge with others. And speaking of Nuwafi, as you very rightly said,
yes,
I think the three very important, I would say, pillars, I would say axes, they are very important for our future generations, for sustainability. The first one, as you rightly said, the water security, second, food security, and third is energy security. The three are extremely important, and I think the whole idea about climate change is how can we secure the three very important aspects of sustainable development, because without being able to look through the synergies, you need energy for water security, you need energy for food security, and you need water for food security. So there are various kinds of linkages, synergies, and the important thing is that the three together, if we are quite adamant about implementing all the program as such. Yes. And I think they're going to, the three being implemented together, I think they would lead us to social security and to ensure that the people would would have all the safeguards necessary, the future generations, to secure their food, to secure their water, and to have energy that is clean, is reliable, and does not have any impact on the environment. So I think the three important files here are necessary, and I think this is an initiative that shows the whole world, demonstrates how we are serious about climate change impacts and how we are trying to adapt. And also doing the energy file is actually more mitigation and adaptation, but it's more mitigation because we're doing the, as you said, for example, green hydrogen or wind energy or solar energy. This is all mitigation. But at the same time, it's also how we are able to secure our future energy needs. And look what happened in Europe, for example, because of the Russian conflict. They were not able to secure their own energy needs. And that's why they wanted to expedite the transformation to new and renewable energy. And that's why Egypt is able, I mean, one person's curse is another's blessing. So we were able to position ourselves as a regional energy hub, because we already started. But as soon as this opportunity came, Egypt was able to grab it and sign with many development partners and many bilaterals and multilaterals deals about green hydrogen, about wind, about this, and even the Minister of International Cooperation, Rania Al-Mashat, I think one of the important things about NWAFI is to look at just financing. I think there was a publication report that came out which talks about this, how you're able to think outside of the box to be able to secure finance, which is not like kind of the traditional, conventional, mainstream kind of financing. You need to be more creative. And I think that's, or innovative. I mean, that's how they designed this package for NWAFI as partly concessional finance, grants, and debt relief, which is very important. We're talking about part of this, which is not really much, but at least it's the idea is really extremely brilliant, that you're trying to come up with a blend or a mix of different tools that you're able to mix and match, if you will, between concessional finance, grants, loan, and debt relief. 100 million euros, I believe, from the Germans, which is like bilateral debt relief, to package all this together into like a $10 billion program for NWAFI, and also the phase out of the natural gas fired station, electric fired station. I think this is all. It's like, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where you're trying to fit all the pieces fit together to give you the green economy overall holistic approach. So we're trying to, okay, so you're heading somewhere, you know what your objectives are, but it's like, how do you connect the dots? And I think at COP27, I think we were able to connect the dots.
On the other hand, Doctor, you mentioned that we are in the middle of a transformation process into a greener economy, into the fully green economy for Egypt, at least. Where are we at the moment in terms of comparison between us and Europe, us and the West in general? Are we too far behind in this process?
Okay, first of all, Egypt is Egypt. Egypt is not Europe, and Europe is not Egypt. So let's agree on this. We have our own circumstances, we have our own national characteristics, we have our own identity. So when we are following the advancement in science and technology, R&D and all this, we need to customize it, we need to Egyptianize it to suit our needs and our very special Egyptian context. So we need to put it in the right context. So we are following very closely what is happening in the West in terms of all the advancement in science and technology, But the important thing is that when we are doing technology transfer, I'll just give you one example. We have found out that just doing technology transfer per se is not really feasible, but to be able to do capacity development, to be able to assimilate and to be able to customize the technology to suit your own needs and to be able to own it. We need to own the technology, so it's ownership, it's customization, it's Egyptianization of this. And I think this is why Egypt is setting up, with the help of the United States, I believe, a center in Cairo for capacity development on technology transfer for the new and renewable energies. And I think this is very important. This is going to be actually also directed towards African nations, because the idea is we don't want technology transfer turnkey. We need to be part of this. We need to own it, and we need to understand more about it and how we are able on our own through our universities and
Do we
research.
have the skills needed to be Egyptianizing the experiment or the experience of it?
I think we do, but we need to be incentivized. I think we need more of motivation. And I tell you one thing, when there is political will, the Egyptians can do a lot of things. They can move mountains, they can do a lot of stuff. And I think we have reached a point whereby we all as Egyptians, we have seen that we have very strong political will to do things on the ground.
One of the major statements made today in the closing session of the COP27 by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and the President of the COP27 was that we have set up a loss and damage fund for the more vulnerable countries from the negative impacts of climate change, which is considered a historic achievement. Do you agree with that?
I would say more than agree with that, if I may. Loss and damage has been a very contentious issue which has been debated since 1991, even before the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change came out in 92 in Rio de Janeiro. Developing countries, especially the SIDS, the small island development states, which have issues with sea level rise and so on, they were discussing compensation and loss and damage since 1991. But let me tell you this, they have always been discussing this in corridors, unofficially in meetings. They had the Santiago group, they had the Warsaw group, but it was never officially on the agenda of any COP. So for 26 conferences of parties that have happened before, taken place before, never was loss and damage discussed. And I am so proud of our Egyptian diplomacy that they were able to coordinate and get consensus before the meeting to be able to put this on the agenda for the first time ever. And I think this is a huge achievement just by putting it on the agenda. So imagine not just putting it on the agenda, but discussing it in official meetings and agreeing to have a fund for loss and damage for the very first time. This is a huge thing for developing countries. I think this is a huge success for Egyptian diplomacy, and I think this is, we're making history here. So I think this is my short answer, although it wasn't short. But
yes, Dr. Alaa, we'll be heading to the second report of the daily debate for tonight about the final communique and the final statements coming from the closing ceremony of the COP27 by President of the COP27 and Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry in the upcoming report. So stay tuned.
Egypt's presidency of COP27 submitted on Saturday 3 draft documents to the countries participating in the conference in order to accelerate the pace of negotiation and reach a unanimous agreement in the final statement of the conference. UNFCCC releases COP27 draft deal with placeholder on loss and damage funding. The first document is an 11-page text comprising 18 articles, at the top of which is a call to commit to the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by reducing 43% of greenhouse gas emissions. It also calls for accelerating the pace of international efforts to reduce emissions according to the capabilities and challenges each country faces. The document also calls for providing the necessary funding for the Santiago Network for research and early warning of climate disasters, which is related to the issue of loss and damage. On financing, the text highlights the need to invest $4 trillion annually in renewable energy to reach zero emissions by 2050, and the need for investments of $4 to $6 trillion annually for the international transition to low-carbon economies. However, developing countries need $5 to $6 trillion to meet their climate commitments before 2030, and accordingly, there is an urgent need to provide $100 billion in financing annually, which was previously approved but not met. The Sharm el-Sheikh initiative has been launched for dialogue between countries and major institutions to enhance consensus regarding a number of provisions of the Paris Climate Agreement concerning the financing of developing countries. The draft document welcomes the Sharm el-Sheikh initiative for a 4-year joint action in agriculture and food security and launching the relevant Sharm el-Sheikh website. It also highlights that climate financing is not sufficient to meet the needs of developing countries, which are estimated at $803 billion, and stresses the need to phase out the use of coal and fossil fuel subsidies. Another text was submitted by the COP27 presidency addressing the loss and damage issue, proposing the establishing of new financing arrangements to assist developing countries. It focuses on repairing the damages endured by these countries, providing new resources from multiple sources. The text also stipulates establishing a fund to finance efforts to address loss and damage. It also calls for the establishment of a transitional committee to activate this new funding to be approved at the upcoming COP28 conference. A third proposal was also submitted, calling for strengthening international efforts to mitigate climate change and enhancing international cooperation and dialogue in this regard.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate about the final or the closing session of the COP27 after the end of the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and the main results and the agreements that took place during the 2 weeks or more of the global summit in the city of peace. And I'm honored to be having with me on the daily debate for tonight Dr. Alaa Sarhan, the professor of environmental economics. Dr. Alaa, thank you very much once again for being with us tonight on the daily debate. Together for implementation was the main slogan for the COP27. Did it live up to the billing, to the slogan itself, the COP27? Because a lot of people there in Sharm el-Sheikh, they were concerned about the pledges, the speeches, the words, but nothing is being translated on the ground. Do you think that there was progress?
I think there is no longer a slogan. I think right now the international community is convinced that climate change is a reality.
Yes.
Climate change, there is, it's evidence-based. It's no longer, people cannot be in denial. People used to be in denial, as a matter of fact, and even from advanced economies and people who are, some of them were even very senior officials in advanced countries were in denial. But I think what happened in the last few months, even when it's very close to home, what happened in Europe, like with all the forest fires and the, you know, some of the rivers, they were like drying up, and then what happened in Pakistan and Nigeria in terms of all these storms and the massive rain and everything. I think it's no longer becoming like kind of potential impacts, or I mean, now I think we're changing the terminology and the lingo that we're using so that it's reality. It's now it's hitting at home. It's no longer like watching it on the silver screen as movies or anything. I think it's now becoming a reality. So therefore, what I think is, it's no longer going to be slogans. I think we need to be all, as international community, as advanced countries, as developing countries. I think we need to work towards securing this planet and being able to reverse, if it's possible, because sometimes there are irreversible damages that cannot be reversed. And I think that's what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has been saying, is that let's not reach the tipping point whereby it is like the point of no return. We cannot reverse the impacts and the losses and all the degradation that's happened to the environment. So I think the international community has come to believe that this is the right time to stop. Let's walk the talk. Let's do what it needs to be done. And I think President Sisi, he summarized it. He said, folks, let's not talk anymore. Let's do something on the ground. Let's strengthen the impacts. If we are doing something, then how do we strengthen the impacts of our work, of our activities on the ground? This is the big question mark. So I think what COP27 did was sharing experiences from all walks of life, all activities, all countries, everybody, to say, how can we do this? How can we work together to do it? So we saw how technology can do it. Do we have technological advances? Do we have solutions? Yes, we do. But that needs financing. That needs somebody to take responsibility. That needs somebody to show us the way. That needs... So there are certain things that COP27 attempted to do, was basically like climate finance, loss and damage, technology transfer. So these three big files, they were there, and I think Egypt's success was bringing this to the forefront and making it left, right, and center, so that all the international community can engage in useful exchange and be able to at least have a roadmap. If we're not going to resolve everything in Sharm el-Sheikh,
yes.
Definitely not. That was not the plan, and I don't think anybody could say what we did. I mean, looking back on things in retrospect, I don't think that was the design of Sharm el-Sheikh, was to resolve everything, but it's a starting point so that we can build on what we have. We have achieved a lot, and I think COP28 in Dubai is in UAE is going to capture the moment and is going to capitalize on what we have achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh and to move forward. So it's all like it's like building blocks. So we have put in the foundation. Remember, we had UNFCCC was signed in Rio 1992. 97 we had the Kyoto Protocol, 5 years afterwards, yes. And then we had Paris Agreement 2015. We have Sharm el-Sheikh in 2022, 20 years after Rio de Janeiro. And I think this is going to be a major milestone for many generations to come.
Speaking of Rio de Janeiro, the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, was there at the COP in the last couple of days of it. President of the US, Joe Biden, was there. The president of France, heads of government from all over the world were there. Delegates from all over the world were there as well at the COP27. Do you think there is real intent from the countries to be turning the pledges into implementation on the ground for the sake of the planet, not just for the sake of the poorer nations?
With all due respect, you just mentioned all the countries that are responsible for most of the emissions, by the way. but there is actually significance for them being here. First of all, Lula da Silva is very much pro climate change, combating climate change on the ground, and I think he is going to take it to the next level, because Brazil is one of the major countries, as you know, and in terms of emissions, but they also have the huge potential for new and renewable energy, and they're going to do with Lula's President De Silva's commitment and his being extremely serious, and he has this political will to do so. I think this is going to go a long way. And President Biden as well, he actually, when he came, before he came, actually, Congress issued the inflation bill like 2 months ago. And to be honest with you, if you look at the inflation bill, combating, how to try to mitigate for inflation, it's basically through climate change projects. So, and I think this is a big sign. If the United States, which is second largest emitter on this planet, if they are serious and adamant about this, and I think the international community is going to take very serious steps towards doing the same.
Yes, Dr. Alaa Sarhan, the Professor of Environmental Economics. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Thank you, sir.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.